Welcome back, and thank you very much for staying with us. Now, today we're talking media freedom and freedom of expression. The case of former President Jacob Zuma against journalist Karyn Maughan has highlighted the plight of journalists being bullied into silence by powerful political persons. Now, many people who are outspoken, including whistleblowers, have been silenced, especially when they speak out against corruption and wrongdoing in government. Another example is the case of Babita Deokaran, who was murdered for exposing corruption at the Gauteng Health Department. Professor Anton Harber from the Campaign for Freedom of Expression, as well as Media Monitoring Africa Head of Policy Program, Thandi Smith, join me now in studio just to discuss particularly what happened this week. Obviously, I think you'd agree, Thandi, that this was something that was a victory for media freedom in South Africa.
Yes, absolutely. I think it was an overwhelming victory for media freedom, but we shouldn't have been arguing the case in the first place. It should never have been brought forward. The attempts at private prosecution of Karyn Maughan should never have taken place. And so the fact that, we were grappling with the issue, grappling with the legal case, I think is alarming. But the outcome of the court case and the judgment is an absolute victory for media freedom.
Prof, I wonder what you thought of the words that were used by this bench of judges in their judgment. For instance, referring to the Stalingrad approach during World War II. That's quite a huge comparison in terms of a president democratically elected in South Africa and how they described him in their particular judgment.
Look, it was a very carefully thought through, well-written judgment by a panel of 3 High Court judges. And it was a real slapdown for the Stalingrad approach and for the legal team that lies behind that. It was a slap in the face to that legal team. But adding to what Thandi was saying, there's a number of recent events, of which the Maughan trial is one, that makes one concerned that we really have to be on the alert around media freedom and that we can't be complacent.
Talk to me about some of those issues. I mean, for me, what I remember is quite a lot of cases where with different political parties, journalists who ask certain questions are kicked out, or we've had our senior reporter, Slindelo Masigane, just covering a government event, and because the MMC in that particular department was on an EFF councillor, she was then, pushed and shoved around, and obviously they apologized after that. But I'm guessing this is why you're saying we need to be careful in terms of how media is treated by big people in our country, and then it filters down to the ordinary person.
Well, I think it's at 2 levels. The first is the formal level. There was the attack on Karyn Maughan, and luckily the courts have thrown that out. There was the court action against by the Moti group against Amamungani, the investigative group, last week, which was a dismal judgment. Dismal. How that ever happened in secrecy is just astounding. Very worrying. Fortunately, another judge heard it 3-4 days later. He's at least put it on ice, and there'll be a full and proper hearing on the case. And your introduction referred to the assassination of whistleblowers, Babita Deokaran, and there's the investigators, the mayor, father and son. The climate of organized crime and lawlessness is increasingly impinging and threatening the work of journalists. You're also referring to a number of not informal, but one-on-one attacks on journalists doing their work, people being intolerant, stopping them doing their work. There is the Lady R ruling that it's all going to be in secret. These are all ominous signs for free media and free expression that we need to be looking at.
And Thandi, your thoughts around what the Prof is saying in terms of journalists, and Prof, I guess when you say informal, you're talking about cases that didn't necessarily even end up in court, and there's not been any judgment in terms of that, etc. But there's also the danger of it filtering down to the ordinary person, because they're looking at high-profile people treating journalists like this, and then we will be attacked by even the public.
Yeah, and that's why when it comes to issues between journalists and being harassed or intimidated by those in power, it's especially dangerous. Powerful, those in power, whether it's government or corporate, have a responsibility to treat journalists and media in a certain way, in a responsible way, and to maintain that relationship. You go back to the classic saying of the media's role is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And it's about that balance. And what we're seeing is those in power, particularly in government, cracking down on journalists and the media when they feel uncomfortable and when they feel that journalists are pushing. But I just wanted to throw into the mix, you know, we always want to try and focus on the positives or see where there is hope. But in addition to what has been put on the table, the online harassment that we've seen of journalists, and especially female journalists, is also, I think we can easily say, increasing at an alarming rate. And we again see politicians thrown into the mix of those who are perpetuating the harassment. And like you very, you know, rightly say, when you see a politician or someone with high profile or someone in power acting in a certain way, whether it's sort of in a physical setting or an online setting, people assume that it's okay to do that and follow through. And that's why they have a greater responsibility to set an example.
I just have to flip the question a little bit to both you, Prof, and you, Thandi. Is there anything that we did as an industry to get this type of attack, if I can call it attack?
Are you victim blaming?
No, absolutely not. I'm just trying to understand for those viewers who are watching and they are thinking, we have every right to question you as well.
No, you have every right to question. We are an imperfect industry. There's no question. We sometimes get things wrong. We need to be challenged. We need to be accountable as journalists. No question. People should be asking questions, challenging us, holding us accountable. But it should not be threats, either physical or online, and harassment of that sort. Harassment of the sort that chills journalists from doing their work. That's not acceptable, and there can be no excuse for that.
And I agree definitely with the Prof, and you?
Yeah, I think to add to that, or maybe I'll throw in another view. I don't think the media have done anything to deserve the attacks, but I think the media can also do more to build trust and credibility with its audiences, so that when and if the attacks happen, the public have a particular trust and a particular view of media and journalists. There's a bit of that backing, and I think that, you know, opens up a whole other conversation about trust and credibility and in the era of mis and disinformation. But I think that media and journalists can do more to build their reputation and trust with their audiences. I think that, just to add on to what Prof is saying, where there is a dispute or where there is a challenge with media, we have very well-functioning mechanisms, regulatory mechanisms, that the public and government and whoever needs to can challenge media. We have the Press Council, we have the BCCSA, we've got these strong self-regulatory mechanisms that we can use and are used. And so when media do make mistakes, there are ways to be able to hold media accountable. And I think we need to be promoting that a lot more as well.
Maybe also the other problem, Prof, is the relationship between ourselves and government, where we're treated as the enemy instead of the people who are trying to make sure that there's accountability. And then there's the misuse of the words nation building in that conversation.
You're absolutely right. What we need to build is a situation of mutual respect. This is the job of the politicians, this is the job of the state, this is the job of the police, this is the job of the corporate world, this is the job of the media. And within that, the job of the public media as well. It needs to be based on mutual respect. We can disagree, we can dislike each other, we can offend each other, we can provoke each other, we can be rude to each other, but it must be based on a respect that we all have our jobs and our roles in a democracy, and we must be allowed to do that and protected from attacks on that.
I know that this question is probably going to, you know, it's going to infuriate some viewers or make people not understand. Maybe also the other part that we need to look at is our legal system and how much of what the court said was the abuse of the system it allows. 19 years. And we still don't have answers.
So there's no question that that in the Maughan judgment, it's clearly the judges themselves are tired of the Stalingrad effect, and they slapped it down and and they gave a costs order, which will be painful to those who brought the case. So hopefully there's a growing exhaustion with allowing that kind of delay. In the Maughan judgment, we saw first a terrible judgment. Really, I don't know where that judge comes from or what he knows about the law, but he got it so wrong. Yeah. Fortunately corrected by another judge, but it does make us nervous about our reliance on protection from the courts. And we all know there's a problem with slow prosecutions and slow justice system action when, for example, journalists are attacked. They should be, Karyn Maughan has faced a flood of abuse and threats and harassment. Where are the authorities thinking of how to give her protection?
Exactly, that's absolutely it. And, this also comes back to the debate that was had at some point on Channel during the time that we still had my former colleague Thulasizwe Simelane, where there is something that was brought up by the former president during one. He has so many court cases. Sometimes you just lose count, trying to basically just remember which one this was. But he was basically saying the issue with the appointment of judges is that, first of all, the appointments of judges come from, most of all, especially top judges like the Constitutional Court, the president. And then also the fact that some of those judges were also freedom fighters, and there's a relationship with some political parties, etc. Is there also just that gap as well there in terms of fixing maybe the law to make sure that, as Prof is saying, the appetite for the abuse of law doesn't take as long as this particular case, 19 years?
Well, I think that although we can find holes and gaps and places where judgments haven't necessarily been what we would agree with, such as the recent case, the Maughan case, I think that we need to be confident that our judicial system is intact and that we can rely on that. Because if that fails, I think that's a desperate state.
You wanted to say something, Prof?
Yes, I think there's a deep concern.
Yeah.
The last two bulwarks against state corruption under the previous administration were the judiciary and the media. Judiciary, I fear, is in some ways being weakened by. The problem, as I see it, is the Judicial Services Commission. Okay. It's not with the presidency.
Yeah.
It's that the Judicial Services Commission is making political decisions and judgments instead of saying, does this judge know the law? And does this judge have a sense of constitution and human rights? So in the Maughan case, we saw a judge who clearly had none of that. And you think, how did he get appointed?
Exactly. All right, so I'm going to ask the two of you if you can just give me a few more minutes. We just have to roll over to the 2 o'clock bulletin. And if you could just stay with me, I promise I'll keep you for about 10 minutes. I know it's Sunday, you need to have your 7 colors at home. Professor Anton Harber from the Campaign for Freedom of Expression and Media Monitoring Africa Head of Policy Program, Thandi Smith.